I've been doing this for 25 years, and I don't think I've ever heard anything like what I've done made people feel better about who they were, And I just thought, God, if I could do more of that. And when it came down to it, I was like, they just appreciate the way we talked about what we offer. They appreciate it. They don't just see it and discard it. They feel more empowered by how we talk about it. And so that's where this idea of appreciated branding came from. And then there was tons of other examples I started finding where I was like, well, that's an appreciated branding idea. That's an appreciated branding idea. And I kind of hung the name on it. People are doing it. Clients, agencies are doing it.
Step into the world of success with your brand amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. I am so thrilled to have Reid Holmes on the show. Reid, we've been trying to make this happen for 10 months, so I'm glad we finally made it here. We're talking about one of my favorite topics and yours, and we'll be talking about your book, Appreciative Branding, as well. So
Yep.
Thank you for being here.
There it is.
Fantastic. Let's talk about your background. You have a vast amount of agency experience. You have your own shingle now. So talk about coming up in the agency world. Had you always intended to be part of an agency and in corporate?
Well, it's interesting because back in the 90s, and I've been in the advertising business since 91, which, is not, I guess I'm dating myself, but it was a very different time then. And I joke about it with people because I remember one of the first times I had to write a radio commercial. It was for Sears, of all things. I remember Sears. And I had to write two commercials for, I don't know, they were two 60-second commercials for a promotion or something, and Kenmore Appliances or Craftsman or something. And the junior account exec, who were relegated to radio, just like the junior writer was, said, okay, I've got 2 weeks for you to write these commercials. And I had literally just come from another person's office who I'd met since I started. And he was just like, don't let them cut back on your timeline. Make sure you got time to write it. So she's like, 2 weeks. And I'm like, that's not enough time. You've got to give me more time. And she's like, okay, I'll give you 3 weeks. And I'm like, okay, all right, good. And I'm just like, I look at that now and it's just like, give me 3 hours,
Yeah.
3 hours to do something, Right. It's just so different. It's so different. And so I think one of the things that's interesting about it being different is that it's a two-way conversation now. It's not just advertisers putting out what they want you to hear. It's, there's a bullshit mechanism now. There's a way and I hope it's okay if I, but there's a way for people to say, yeah, no, that's not cool. No, you say you are for exactly, as an example, you say you support women in corporate America, but you have none on your board. So what's that all about? And so you can put pressure on companies and you can do that kind of thing now where you couldn't before because it just wasn't as visible and there was no talkback button. So things have changed a lot since then. And I've kind of straddled the traditional and the digital. I probably spent the first half of my career in just traditional and then was really curious about all these emerging technologies of, the internet. And, I hate to say it, but even email was in its founding stages when I started working. So, I remember the guy walking around the office with the cart and dropping off the memos and, that kind of thing. So it's changed a lot. But what hasn't changed is, I think, the need for story and the need for connection that's authentic. People have always been able to suss that out. And that's never going to change.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I would argue that it's even more visible than ever. As you mentioned, we can hold companies accountable if they're saying one thing and doing something else, right?
Yeah. In fact, one of the things I put in, and this is a deep cut for even in digital, but I don't know if you remember one of the first big viral company blow up issues, which was United Breaks Guitars. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that one.
Okay. So back in the mid aughts, noughts, or whatever it is, the 2003, 4 maybe. YouTube was still in its infancy, and a guy was flying on United. He was a guitar player. He had a really nice Taylor acoustic guitar, and he watched in horror from the plane as the people loading it just threw it onto the plane like a side of beef. And he wrote a song called United Breaks Guitars, and it took off. And United didn't do anything about it. They didn't, it would have been smart of them to go, you know what? We blew it. We'll buy you a new guitar. You can fly free for the next year or whatever. But they didn't do that. And that to me is one great example now of, mess ups like that can be your best opportunity to earn greater appreciation in your brand.
Yeah. Once you told that story, I remembered it. I think at that time in my career, I was working in San Francisco for a publisher and launching the official Xbox magazine when Xbox first came out.
Very
So
cool.
a little bit
Yeah.
different, but I did the early days of the internet and figuring out what do we need a website for? How do we, I was still using chat rooms to find people for the different magazines because I launched a dance music magazine as well. So I had one group, I had to find my street team through these chat rooms of people who like dance music and going to events. And then, the other one was people who are video gamers and were really excited about this new console that was coming out. So, it's really funny to think back about how much things have changed and what people now look at with the influencer economy and like all of these other.
And what's funny to me too is how things change and we don't even, it just kind of just evolves and we're like, oh, that's right. We don't do that. I guess we don't do that anymore. I guess we've moved on from that. Like, I think what's going to happen in the future is people are like I was just using AI this morning to do some research and some, find some speaking gigs and stuff. And it's so much faster and it's so much more thorough. It's hallucinating less than it did maybe a year ago. And I'm realizing, oh my gosh, I'm not even on Google. I'm not even Googling for these things and then writing them down and whatever. I can tell ChatGPT to put an Excel spreadsheet together of the next 20, whatever. And it gives me all the usable links and everything. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I was also using Claude, my favorite tool, this morning to go through some research and some things for an intro for somebody for a different podcast. Yeah, it's an amazing tool that we have at our disposal, but it's also, just thinking about the way that digital's changed. Number one, you talked about United having this missed opportunity to solidify a brand position that had positive sentiment, right? Nowadays, they would never be able to get away with that. We see different brands jumping on bandwagons, talking to each other. Who doesn't love Wendy's as a brand or Duolingo and the way they snark back and forth.
Yep.
But brands are also having to realize, oh, we did this one thing that was kind of funny, maybe a campaign for International Women's Day and about how women, the one that was like, women should be in the kitchen and the blah, 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 and the blah, blah,
Oh,
blah.
yeah. Whoops.
But, But then they had to do a whole bunch of, we messed up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or Pepsi during the pandemic with Kendall Jenner commercial where.
Oh my God, that was horrible.
Yeah,
That
so there are
was
all these
just
examples of people
tone
who are
deaf.
still missing the mark. And so what does that mean for brands today? How do they best ask for forgiveness or take, culpability and responsibility and make changes? Because now we're also seeing that in this political ecosystem, some brands are saying, we're no longer DEI, but some are saying, we're not using those words, but we're using these words. Or some are saying, no, we're fully going to stay in our lane. We're going to be unapologetic. And we're seeing repercussions for each one of those levels.
Yeah, I think, there was a saying a few years ago, and I think it's more powerful now than ever, which is customer service is the new marketing department. And it's kind of like, I think I just read a Seth Godin book, and he said, if you're trying to launch a brand today, you need 20 people who will believe in you, who are just ride or dies, and they will spread your word and they will spread and give it time, because time is you have most people when you're starting a business, you have more time than money. So you get them going and they become the people who spread the word for you. But the way to get the word spread is you have to have a great story. You always have to have a great story. You have to have something that's surprising and unexpected. And that's how you get people to pay attention. I was just listening to this pod this morning he's a planner, strategist, research guy from Ogilvy, and he's just a really smart guy. And he was talking about the fact that the human, and maybe I'm getting a little granular here, but this was fascinating to me. The human mind is programmed to predict what's coming next. And when you shock them with something unexpected, it makes you remember it more. So it's kind of like a joke, you know? It's like when George Carlin, one of my favorite jokes he always said is when you're, because it's not where you expect it to go. Your mind works so fast that you're kind of like, well, I know where this is going. Heck, I get that all the time when I'm talking to my family. They're all like, oh, I see what you're talking about. No, 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 that's not where I'm going with it. You know, it's just like it's human to try and figure out what's coming next. And that's why comedy is so powerful because, the George Carlin quote was, when you put your foot on the brake, your life is in your foot's hands. It's just like, what is that? But it's funny, it's like, oh yeah, okay. But it's that thing where it's like usurp their expectation, I think is what it's called. It's just like you interrupt their expectation, then you can really get attention. And that's the opportunity for United when they screw up, or for anybody when they screw up, because no one expects them to stand up and you know, take the blame and admit that they blew it. One of my best examples from my book, and this is another facet of what I call appreciated branding, is fixing when something's not quite done right, and everybody screws up. So there was a friend of mine. I have two boys, and we did Boy Scouts, and so I got to know a lot of these dads. And one of them was at the meeting, and he's just like, I just took his job at this grocery store, and you never believe what was happening, but it was my first week there, and this elderly woman showed up to pick up her groceries, and they hadn't been shopped yet, and it was like, what am I going to do? And I went and talked to the manager. He said, here's what you're going to do. You're going to give her this $100 gift card. You're going to tell her that we're going to shop her order and bring it to her house. And we're going to tell her that her next order is completely free.
Wow.
And that's what we're going to do. And they do that because it's the right thing to do. It's more than the right thing to do. But she's going to tell people about that.
Exactly.
Your current customer always knows your next customer. So if you're filling them with great stories about you, even if it costs you $200, that is going to propagate, and it's going to be more authentic, because there's never been anything more powerful than word of mouth advertising. There's just never will be, there never has been, and that's the deal. Everything else is essentially a crutch, because we buy things based on recommendations from others. We hire people based on recommendations from others. So it's an interesting thing, because as much as stuff changes, some things just never change.
I was just having this discussion yesterday and talking about brand and the very things that you're saying, that, and that's why I think we're seeing the shift towards people using more user-generated content or user-generated lookalike content versus just completely professionally produced content. That's because we want to relate to the people we see in the ads, or we want to hear that testimony from somebody else. That's why we all look at reviews, right? And that is why we're really looking at an age of personalization. But, before we get into all of that, let's go back to your work in the agencies.
Sorry.
No. But you moved up. And at what point did you have that moment when you said, you know what, it's time for me to do my own thing, because I see this need and this gap in the market?
Well, I had always thought I wanted to do something more. And there's a couple things that happened. My kids graduated. I have twins, a boy and a girl. They graduated from high school, and I have a 4-year older brother, and he graduated from college. And I sat there going, all I've ever done is ephemeral. It's just work for somebody else to make them a lot more money. What can I do that's just more meaningful for the world? And when I look back at some of the work I had done over the years, I'd worked on Burger King, I've worked on Mayo Clinic, I've worked on Domino's Pizza, I've worked on Healthy Choice, I've worked on Ford, I mean, you name it. I've worked on a lot of big brands. And there was one particular case that I looked at that just really kind of got my neurons buzzing, and it was H&R Block. And so I was a group creative director, running a few different accounts. I think Toro, Burger King, one called Frontier Communications. There was one other one. And H&R Block was an account that was at the agency where I worked, and they had put the account in review, and I had never been able to work on it. And the CEO came into my office one day and said, "We're in review, and I want you to be the creative, point person on this." And I'm like, "I've never done a pitch before. I don't know what to do, like." He's like, we're going to help, but we need a new face." And I'm like, "Okay." So we came up with this idea. Long story short, we pitched it. We won the business back. We retained the business. They not only gave us back the business, but they wanted to run the idea that we pitched. And that's never happened. So a couple of never happens kind of lined up. We retained the business. They picked the idea we pitched, and we kept it for another 3 years and lost it only due to political crap. But the agency politics and client politics and that kind of thing. But the idea we did was, it just kind of hit me in the heart one day, because the insight that we worked against was, and I give the planners all the credit in the world for this insight, which is what gave birth to the idea. But their insight was, their positioning was, H&R Block is the advocate for the middle American financial outsider. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. And so we came up with an idea where we basically asked the question, well, what does the insider have that the outsider doesn't? And the idea was, well, they got people to take care of that for them. They got someone who can, they got a guy, they got someone who can do it for them. So we pitched them this idea: when you got H&R Block, you got people. And it's kind of a populist thing. And it was, to me, it kind of came out of a Seinfeldian kind of I got people, like George and Jerry kind of bantering. But 2 weeks after we launched that idea, my head account director came into my office, and he's like, "Did you see the email?" And I'm like, "Oh God, what now?" And he said, "Open it up. I'll sit down." And so our client had sent an email that was forwarded from the H&R Block customer service, department or whatever. And it was this woman who told the story of that she was from, I think I remember, it was Dunbar, West Virginia. She was riding in the car with her daughter and was going to use H&R Block for her taxes, and pulled up in front of the store, and the daughter saw the sign and said, "Mom, does this mean we have people?" And the mom was like, "Well, yeah, it does. It does. It means we've got people." And she wrote a note in to Block about this, about how it made her feel. It made her feel seen. It made her feel empowered. It made her feel like she had some special means that a lot of people don't. And I think it empowered the ego of both her and her daughter enough that she would write an email. And I was just like, God, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I don't think I've ever heard anything like what I've done made people feel better about who they were, and I just thought, God, if I could do more of that. And when I came down to it, I was like, they just appreciate the way we talked about what we offer. They appreciate it. They don't just see it and discard it. They feel more empowered by how we talk about it. And so that's where this idea of appreciated branding came from. And then there was tons of other examples I started finding where I was like, well, that's an appreciated branding idea. That's an appreciated branding idea. And I kind of hung the name on it. People are doing it. Clients, agencies are doing it. The most recent example I just saw for Molson Canada. Molson Canada. And this kind of gets into the fact that what we did was more of a way of talking about what the brand does, but it's really about doing and about how you solve a problem. So even though we didn't talk about it, You Got People really speaks to what Block does, which has 60,000 tax pros spread across the country that you can go talk to about your taxes. So there's an act involved, not just an ad, right? And so this was something I just saw, and it blew me away. And it was called See My Name. And it was Molson in Canada sponsored, or had a sponsorship for girls hockey. And they found this problem where girls who play hockey, their hair covers up their name, because their name is, for dudes, it's, no one ever thought, oh, I guess we all have long hair, so it's going to go. So Molson came up with this idea called See My Name. And they took the jerseys and they took the actual name of the player and put it down at the bottom under the number, and just replaced the hole or the mess with a Molson patch, which would be covered up by the hair.
Yeah.
This jumped up their sales by 6%.
Wow.
I mean, these things work.
Yeah.
People appreciate it when you see them and when you understand them and when you can get into solving problems that they didn't realize they had. And that's really what appreciated branding is about. It's, oh, you saw that and you saw that it affects me and you did something to help me be a better version of myself. That's really great. And so that's one example. I could give you more if you want,
Yeah.
but
Well, no, so that's how you got to the point where you said, I need to do something different. I really want to
yeah.
work with these brands that are shifting the narrative and actually making an impact and not have maybe a few of those examples in the work that you were doing, plus other companies that you worked with that maybe didn't have that significant of, an awareness. Like,
Yeah, I think that the marketing business has changed not just because of technology, but because we're all hit with 10,000 interruptions a day. When the interruption model of advertising started, it was essentially soap operas in the 50s, right? It was, a soap company sponsoring a show that would attract housewives at home, and the people who owned that audience were the soap companies, and they got to put in their ads and whatever. Interruption evolved to, well, I'm just going to borrow your audience and pay you some money and put my commercial in there and get that attention from them. And as I've said, attention really is the oxygen of marketing, but how do you get it these days in a meaningful way?
yeah,
And with 10,000 messages coming at us, every day and distractions every day, what I talk about in the book is that people pay attention to the things they already care about. It's values driven now more than ever.
absolutely.
So if I don't value, and you can make the values apply to what you're selling if in some ways. So for example, there's a story a mentor of mine told me once about a tennis pro. He came and said, I can't get arrested. I can't get any customers to give lessons to. And he said, well, what if there's a niche of people who could really use what you do? And so they finally came around to the fact of like, well, young parents have young kids. They're bouncing off the walls. They've got all this energy. Why don't you market yourself as a teacher for kids? You take the kids away for an hour, you wear them out on the tennis court, you return them tired, mom and dad get a break. His business went through the roof. And the idea here is, again, thank you. Thank you for thinking of a problem I didn't realize I had and solving it for me. And so that's where this appreciated branding really takes root, is it's not about the product, because that's the other thing. So you put a quarter in and I'm going to do, you bought a
No.
ticket. So I'm giving you the ride. So, but marketing used to be and still is for a lot of companies. I'm going to spend a lot of money to interrupt you, to tell you to care about me, to care about what
Exactly.
I sell,
Here
to
are
care
all
about
of
what
my
I do.
features. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And the ones that are succeeding now have shifted, and they're not interrupting to say care about me. They're saying, I'm going to do this to prove that I care about you. Now you've got my attention, right? It's a very different thing. And it immediately boils you into this whole other kind of distillation of, oh, well, that's not what I expected. And again, to that whole idea of being expected and breaking patterns. I didn't expect that. Now you've made an impression. Now I've got, an impression of who you are and what you're, and that's all brands are, is associations and impressions, it's, reputation, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Well, let's talk about the brand appreciation pyramid. So, what is the hierarchy on that?
well, so it's a pyramid, and at the top is what you solve. And as you get wider, it's what you do. And then at the bottom, it's what you say. And you have to say more in advertising and marketing, but you have to back it up with things you do. And then and the bigger opportunity, the big white space is how you solve problems. Now, on one side of the pyramid, you've got your product. So my product, what we say is it gets whites whiter and colors brighter. And a problem, or one of the things we do is we make these pods, so it's easier to use this detergent. And then what we solve and this is the rational side, what we solve is no more drippy bottles, no more messy mess. Easy measurement in, and you throw it in and you're done. And that's all great, but it's like expected. It's like everybody's doing that. You can stand in the aisle at a grocery store and there are 60 different detergents and they all solve the same problem.
Yeah.
So how are you going to be the one that they go, oh, yeah. So on the other side of that is the unexpected. So on the unexpected side, you've got what you say, what you do, and what you solve. And oftentimes and usually what you solve informs what you do and what you say. It kind of levers between do and solve. But what is another example? One of my favorite examples, this is Ariel detergent in India. They found a problem, they found a data point, and that's where a lot of this stuff originates, much like the hockey example or even the tennis example. You find a data point that people are dealing with, they're struggling with, there's something going on that you can help solve. And they figured out that in India, and this was in 2017, 95% of the population still thought laundry was a woman's job. So they said, well, we can fix that. So what they did is they go, okay, there's a problem we can solve. You know what we'll do? We'll launch a campaign and we'll call it Share the Load, and we'll advocate for everybody in the family to help with the laundry. Hashtag share the load, post your stuff, whatever, use it in the digital. And they have traditional TV commercials talking about, dramatizing the issue. And that was their message. And that's what fed this whole side of this thing. The rational side, where you're talking about whiter whites and pods and stuff, that's never going to get you what they got from this, which was 76% sales increase. Because the people who bought the product said, thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for understanding what I have to deal with every day. It's a much bigger deal, and it gets people's attention, and it makes much more of an impact than you just talking about yourself.
Yeah.
So
you shared a few examples, and I love the fact that you mentioned data points, because I think you have to have the storytelling and the data to back it up. And it's something I teach grad school at USC, and that's one thing I always talk to
my
my
son went to
students
USC.
about. Oh, wow. Well, we'll have to talk about that offline. It's one thing I always talk to my students about, is that so many companies still today, whether it's at a pitch competition or in a commercial, they talk about their features. They don't talk about that emotional, visceral reaction that somebody will have to the problem that's being solved for them. And so you want to have that storytelling, but you also want to have that data, as you mentioned, with your pyramid, because you want to say, yes, we do this and get people in there, but then you actually want to show the proof of the pudding. So, yeah. So I'd love to hear a little bit about if people obviously, I think you have some stories to share there, but also for the smaller business today that's looking at, are they going to be affected by tariffs? Can they afford to hire the next person? They know that they need to do marketing and advertising, so they're not going to cut those first, unlike so many companies. But how can they continue to hone in on some of the techniques that you use and some of the ideas that you've shared to not increase their budget, but get better results, get bigger results?
So one of the things I advocate is, and I have a construct called the appreciation loop. And what it is it's kind of like a sideways figure eight. And the whole idea is you figure out what are your rational differentiators and what are your emotional differentiators. If your rational differentiators are essentially the category, and don't fool yourself into thinking because you have Retsin in your formula, that's differentiating enough. No one has time to parse that crap anymore. What emotional benefits do you bring? Because that's where you disrupt and that's where you get attention. And if you don't know what those are, that's one of the things I help clients do. I just had a conversation with a guy who has this business. He built an entire apparel brand and he's facing tariffs now, and he's trying to figure out what to do. And so one of the things I said is, well, this is the small bets for big upsides. And you basically do a pilot and you figure out, like, can you do something like, one of the examples of what he did is he saw a podcast where someone was talking about his gear, and this person is somewhat of an influencer. So he had a custom jersey made. The guy on the podcast was talking about a certain thing. I think it was sunflowers or something. So that's not right. It wasn't sunflowers, but it was something that he could go, well, I'm going to have a jersey made custom for you, and I'm going to deliver it to you because I heard you on this podcast and I think it's really cool. Now, one of the things he didn't do, and this is why he's talking to me, is, I said, you should have, not only was it great to arrange that, not only are you inspiring a lot of gratitude and a lot of goodwill toward you as a brand, but you've got to find ways to get credit for it. So if you could have found in your searching for, this guy, someone who knows him, who could go video him when he's doing this, when he's opening, unboxing this thing, and then have some really authentic reactions, those are the things that cost nothing that can be seen by millions, or they can be seen by 1,000,
Mhm.
or they can see by 10 people. Who knows? But the fact is, you're stacking the deck in your favor. And as you go around this loop, okay, here's the shirt idea. We're going to execute it this way. We're going to go to that. Now we're going to put it out here. Is it getting some traction? Okay, well, let's buy a few ads, spend $1,000 or whatever. Let's see what happens there. Okay, what can we learn from it? Is it worth? And you come back across. Is this the next thing? We just make it bigger, or is there something else we can do? Has something else happened in culture? Has something else happened in society? Is there something going on that we can leverage? Wendy's is great at this, and I've never worked with them, and I don't think they use my construct because I just came up with it a month and a half ago. But the appreciation loop. But to me, that's the secret to small bets for huge upsides, because you need to know that it's like picking. Someone once said, you can't predict what's going to go viral, right?
Right. Mhm.
You can't, just like it's hard to predict what's going to be a number one song. You just don't know. I mean, a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking about that, and they're pretty good. They have a pretty good track record for picking them, but you just don't know. What you have to do is stack the deck in your favor. And that is understand what people appreciate, understand what trips their patterns. And usually it's something good. It's something like surprising. And then understand how to capitalize on that so that you get more exposure and more fame from it. And that's really the heart of it. Fame is a success multiplier.
And what's the typical size of company, if there is one that you work with? Do you work with the really small businesses? Do you work with, you know, businesses that have been more successful, or enterprise solutions, or
Well, in my career, I worked with big blue chip companies, and they could use this process that I'm talking about, but they're too busy using the old ways. And so what I generally focus on is mid to small businesses, and I can help them get attention through acts of appreciation, of earning appreciation. And that means, what's your elevator's pitch? Who do you serve? What do you solve? And what happens after in their life after you've done that? It's that basic stuff. But yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of times, killed a lot of brain cells thinking about this. And the reason is I just didn't want to, I'm circling back to your question about how I feel like I'm just all over the road here, Annika, so I'm
no.
sorry. But, what spurred me on to do this is it's just so much more meaningful. Like I don't need to go and shoot another TV commercial in LA or Africa or wherever. I mean, I've shot everywhere. I don't need to do that anymore. I want to help marketers do good for the world. And by doing that, they're going to be doing very well for their brands. So,
Yeah, fantastic. And writing the book, what was that experience like? And obviously, it helped with your brand outside of the agency, because I have heard sometimes people have had great careers in large agencies, left, and then but maybe they weren't the creative director, but they had a significant role, but then they're not able to show necessarily, oh, this is the exact work I did on this client, because they're part of a team. And so shifting their brands can sometimes be difficult. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, the book.
well, the book was, start with the book, a small story. I was introduced to a guy who is a book agent. He's like a agent for, well, I guess book writing or whatever. And I had a call with him, and his first question to me was, "What's your social media following?" And I'm like, "What does it have to do with me wanting to write a book?" And it became eminently clear to me that the only reason that he wouldn't care about what I'm writing about. He didn't care about anything other than, I'll sell 2 books for every 1,000 people or something like that, or you're connected to. I don't even know what the math was, but it was some silly thing like that. I'm like, well, I've just not. I mean, I've got more than most, but I don't think I'm killing it. And they're like, okay, well, what's the book about? Let's just talk about that. And I said, well, I'm almost done writing. He's like, wait a minute, you're writing it? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm, it's my subject. It's my idea. Well, we usually don't have authors write their own book. I was like, what are you
Whoa.
talking? Well, like, what is, did I just go through some kind of a magic, hole or something? And so it was disillusioning in a sense, but it was also like, well, I'm definitely self-publishing now. And I am glad that I devoted myself to the process of writing the book because and this is another analogy with AI. You can do so many a lot of people are writing books with AI, but for me, I needed to write it myself because I wanted to be confident in what I was talking about. I wanted to torture test it in my own head.
Well, it's your
And
knowledge base instead of the sum of all averages.
exactly. That's a that's like one of the best examples of AI, the sum of all averages. That's perfect. And I wanted it to be from me and from me.
Yes.
And so I was not going to have someone else write it, and I was not going to have AI write it. And so the process of writing it, if all I got to was, here it is, one copy, that's 90% of it for me. Now, I did go on to sell, we ended up getting a bestseller status through Amazon, which is great. But when people say, well, like, how are your book sales? I'm like, well, I'm really more interested in the movement of companies doing good things for the world because that's going to leave the better world for my kids. It's going to make the world a better place for others. And it might actually redeem some of my life interrupting people everywhere with commercials. So, and then what was the other question? The other part of your question
Just
was
about your personal brand and then shifting from being known in the agency world, right, to then taking that into being recognized on your own for the work that you do.
that's an interesting question because I went through this with when I launched my new website in January, which we decided to do it using my name and not appreciated branding. And the reason is the more I looked at it, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, you are your brand. There's only one of, what's the old saying, Oscar Wilde, be yourself, everyone else is taken. No one's ever going to think the way you think, do the way you do, and you bring your own unique value and perspective to that. And as a creative director, I've seen that for 30 years.
Mm.
Creative direction a lot of it is casting, well, this writer and this art director on this project, watch out. They're going to do great. So as far as my brand, a lot of the work that I did and that I cite, like for example, that Agent R Block campaign was an idea that me and my partner came up with. So I'm not like taking some idea that somebody else did that I just creative directed. That the kind of the planets lined up on that one. A lot of the other cases that I use that are from my past, I use a Mayo Clinic case that I did. There's a couple of other ones, Key Bank, which I did, and I can't remember. There was one other one from what we did that I was really a major part of. Then the other thing is really just trying to shine a light on this way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what I want to do. I don't need credit for anything. I 30 years as a creative director, you learn to not take credit for anything. And I don't need it. I just want the world to get better at what marketing can help it get better at, and not at the expense of the results marketing can generate. And quite the opposite, actually. When you do good things and you do things that help the world and help people and recognize problems that need solving that no one has done before, you get so much more goodwill and you get so much more attention and, affection from people who didn't realize that they had a problem and you helped solve it,
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Amazing. Well, I will, and not to get us off on another tangent, but having your name as your website is also really important in this day of agentic AI because search is moving towards AIO and it's moving into chat bots, right? And people are saying, who is Reid Holmes? And one of the techniques I've been told is that you have to have your own website with your own name to separate you. Can be your business, but also, for instance, I have one for my podcast, but I have my URL. I just haven't built my own website yet, but that's the next step I need to do because I'm more than just this podcast, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting thing. And it's a great shift for you to have just recently done this rebrand. When people go to your website, they can learn about you, they can book you to speak, they can learn about your consulting practice, schedule a consultation, they can click the link to get the book. What else is there?
There's a free chapter of my book if you want that you can download there. I also have a newsletter that comes out every Friday, and I hate newsletters. I hate them. They're all just fluffy garbage. So I named this newsletter in order to keep me honest about what I'm putting in it, and I call it Oxygen. And I wanted to be a breath of fresh air for people on a Friday morning of like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Or, oh, that's really interesting information. I had no idea. Or, wow, that's a different way to think about this. And that's a newsletter. It's free. It comes out every Friday morning. You can sign up for it on reidholmes.com, REID Holmes.com, HOLMES. And you can sign up for it there. And you can schedule a consult with me if you need help with, if you want to get your elevator speech figured out. I've been doing that. I just started doing that as just a $97 kind of consultation with people. And I do them as a group coaching thing. And I've got one Monday and I'm going to try and do one the following Monday. So if anybody's interested in that, I don't know when this pod's coming out, but just shoot me a note and I'm happy to help however I can, because I want this mission to go on, which is let's fix problems for people and they will thank us for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that sums up everything so nicely. Reid, do you have a favorite quote, verse, poem, mantra, poem, family motto?
Oh my gosh, I have a couple. One recent one I heard was Muhammad Ali, which he said, maybe the deer isn't crossing the road, maybe the road is crossing the forest. Which makes you kind of think, oh wow, context, that's really important. Like who's looking at this? And I think that's important for marketers because everybody thinks as much about their product as they do, but they don't. Everybody's busy getting their kid in the minivan and trying to get the older brother to soccer and going to the grocery store. And it's just like there's no time for people to just sit down and listen to your message. That era is over. So that's a good quote that I'm reminded of. And then the second one I just heard yesterday, and it's about manifesting, and it's about the law of attraction. And I thought it was a great take because this person said, just by saying I want to manifest something admits that it's not there. And just by saying I want to attract something is an admission that you don't have it yet. So she said, my two favorite words in terms of manifesting or the law of attraction are, it's happening. If you just kind of say it's happening, it's positive, it's assumptive, it kind of acknowledges that, it's not all in your control, but you're doing things to help make it in your control. And, or to try and take control. And still there's a lot you can't control. Anyway.
Yeah.
But anyway, I like that one. So.
Yeah, those are fabulous. And trust me, there are so many tangents we could go off on.
I know.
This conversation, it's been really delightful. And I really appreciate the storytelling, right? And how you've really shown us. And obviously that's something that when you're a good presenter like yourself, you're telling stories that we can have associations for. We form our own associations. We see ourselves in those examples. And that right there is branding.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, Reid, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's watching this episode or listening to it on your favorite platform. I'll be back again with another amazing guest to share their story and their journey. And Reid, look like you have one last comment.
I was going to say thank you for having me. I'm so grateful. It's an honor to be a guest, and your pod is taking off. It's doing great. And I'm really excited that you had me. So thank you.
Well, it's because I get to share stories and enthusiasm of guests like yourself. And that just makes it all better, right?
That's nice.
My way of putting the good into the world, hopefully.
There you go. I love it.
Fantastic. And thanks again, everybody. Don't forget to reach out, check out the show notes for Reid's website. Let me know if there are other thoughts, other guests, questions that you have. Happy to answer them anytime. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbrandamplified.com.